The rain stopped as the orchestra's last note faded, leaving Ashborne Hall heavy with candle smoke and low voices. Lady Yvaina Cavendish stood at the edge of her own wedding celebration, her smile composed, her pulse unsteady. 7 days earlier, she had crossed this threshold as Duchess of Ashborne, the unlikely bride of a celebrated nobleman. She folded her hands to hide their trembling and let her gaze travel across the ballroom. Adrien Cavendish, her husband, stood near the far wall beside his mother. He wore his title with effortless ease, moving through his world as though it had always fit him. His affection had never been theatrical. She had fallen in love with the quiet care in his questions, the way he listened more than he spoke. He had defied custom to marry her. A commoner's daughter from Somerset, whose sharp mind and soft laugh had caught him under an old oak tree. The dowager duchess at his side looked carved from cold patience. She had greeted Yvaina with courtesy, yet an undercurrent of disapproval had always remained, like frost beneath a thin thaw. The orchestra began another waltz, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations clustered into tight circles. As couples drifted past, words brushed against Yvaina like the edge of a blade. Her newly taken name surfaced between phrases not with admiration but with hungry curiosity. She searched for Adrien's face again. When their eyes met, a line of tension shadowed his expression. Concern she recognized. Doubt she had never seen there before. He had grown up in a world where suspicion was called prudence, and a woman's reputation could steady or sink an entire house. The music stuttered, then faded, as if the orchestra itself hesitated. In the brief silence, the dowager moved toward them with calm determination. The crowd gave way without being asked. She stopped between Yvaina and Adrien, addressing her son in a voice low yet effortlessly clear. "Adrien, an unfortunate matter has come to light. We must address it before it festers." Yvaina stepped closer. "What matter?" she asked, keeping her tone steady by will alone. The dowager's eyes lingered on her, cool and appraising. "The servants report that a letter was discovered in your chamber," she said. "It appears to be from a gentleman. Its language is. Such things, if ignored, invite scandal." Yvaina felt the heat rise to her face. "There is some error," she said. "I have no such letter. None has ever been sent to me." Adrien's jaw tightened. "Where is it?" he asked. A maid emerged from the watching servants, a slight girl clutching a folded page. She kept her eyes on the floor as she held it out. Adrien took the letter. The faint crackle of creased paper seemed suddenly loud. Lavender drifted from the sheet, the same scent used in the household linens. He read quickly. Yvaina watched the color shift in his face as his gaze moved line by line. The handwriting was neat and masculine. The words spoke of secret meetings, of a passion that could not be contained. At the top, her name was written in graceful script, as if carved there with deliberate care. "You know nothing of this?" Adrien asked at last. His voice remained even, but its warmth had retreated, leaving only formality. "Nothing," she answered. "I swear I have never seen that page. Every word is a lie." The dowager released a soft-shaped sigh. "And yet the ink is fresh," she observed. "We stand surrounded by witnesses. You are not simply a wife of Yvaina. You are a duchess." Perception becomes truth in houses such as this. A stillness settled that felt thicker than silence. Yvaina saw the conflict behind Adrien's eyes. The battle between the man who had courted her with quiet sincerity and the duke who had been trained to guard his name above all else. The letter rustled faintly in his grip, flimsy and dangerous. When he finally spoke, his words seemed to fall from a great height. "Until this is resolved," he said, "you must leave Ashborne." The world contracted. "You would send me away because of a sheet of paper?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Because doubt has entered this house," he replied. "If the letter is false, you will return with your name cleared. But while questions hang over us, you cannot remain here. I do not say this lightly." The dowager's hand came to rest on his sleeve, light yet decisive, as if guiding a faltering step. The decision settled into place. What followed unfolded with practiced efficiency. Servants moved to fetch her trunks. The dowager quietly instructed the musicians to play something bright. A lively tune rose, brittle and forced, as if joy could be commanded by tempo alone. Guests turned their bodies back toward conversation, but their eyes continued to track Yvaina as she walked the length of the ballroom. At the great doors she paused. Adrien stood on the staircase, the letter crumpled in one hand, his posture rigid. For one fragile moment she saw the man who had once knelt in the grass at Somerset, asking for a future they would build together. Then that memory vanished behind the practiced stillness of a duke. "I will send for you," he said. "As you wish, your grace." Her curtsy was precise, her voice steady. She would not plead in front of people who had already chosen their story. The carriage waited, with its lamps glowing faintly in the damp. Yvaina stepped inside and gathered her skirts. The door closed with a muted thud that sounded to her like a lock turning. The horses pulled forward, gravel ground beneath the wheels. Through the blurred glass she watched Ashborne Hall recede, its windows small bright squares against the dark. Her hand slipped from the window frame and came to rest against her abdomen, fingers spread in unconscious protectiveness. There, hidden beneath silken bone stays, lay the quiet beginning of a life no one in that glittering hall yet knew about. "They may question my honor," she whispered into the dim interior, "but they cannot take the truth growing inside me." The road stretched ahead, slick with rain and shadow. Before her uncertainty waited. Yet the faint promise beneath her hand insisted that exile was not the end. Only the harsh beginning of a story still unfolding. Somewhere behind her, in the glittering house that had cast her out, a man she loved stood listening to his own silence, not yet knowing how deeply this night would mark them both. Morning arrived in Somerset with a muted breath of mist curling over the fields. A small stone cottage sat at the edge of the village, its walls weathered by seasons and solitude. Within it, Lady Evenon, known simply as Mrs. Evans, stitched fabric by the hearth with the precision of someone who had learned to survive rather than to dream. Her hands, once familiar with ink and piano keys, had grown skilled at darning rough cloth. A cradle rested near her chair. From it came the soft stirring of her infant son, Thomas, whose blue eyes mirrored the one face she both longed for and dreaded to recall. She leaned over him and gently brushed a strand of pale hair from his brow. Her voice, low and steady, filled the silence. "You will know your father one day," she murmured, "not as a title, but as a man." This cottage had sheltered her for nearly a year. Though the villagers spoke kindly of Mrs. Evans, they never pried. They knew her as a widow, quiet and hard-working. Few questioned her origins. Fewer still asked about the father of the child. She kept her secrets close, like embers hidden in ashes-small, but capable of reigniting when the wind turned. Each day followed a practiced rhythm, fetching water from the well, sewing garments for nearby households, nursing Thomas when he cried through the night. Hardship had not broken her, though it had altered the shape of her hope. Sometimes she stood at the threshold and listened to the wind, imagining it carrying news from the world she had left behind. But no message ever came. Meanwhile, life within Ashborne Hall grew increasingly quiet. Adrien Cavendish moved through his ancestral home with the calm restraint of a man haunted by absence. The echo of footsteps across polished floors seemed louder than conversation had once been. He visited his study each night, opening and closing letters he could not send. Countless drafts bore her name but ended in unfinished thoughts. Pride defeated ink every time. In place of his wife, he kept a dried violet in a silver box on his desk. Sometimes he would hold it between his fingers until it crumbled slightly, as though time were reminding him of his failure more gently than his conscience ever did. The dowager observed her son with increasing concern, though not for his sorrow. She worried the estate would lose its vigor. Ashborne must endure, she told him over tea. Legacy requires strength, not sentiment. Melancholy benefits no one. Adrien offered no reply. His silence was the only rebellion he still allowed himself. Servants grew uneasy. Some were dismissed for whispering about the vanished Duchess. Yet whispers persisted in corners and corridors, clinging like dust that could never be swept away. In public, his composure remained flawless. But in the privacy of his study, he returned night after night to the same thought. that the letter which had shattered their lives might not have been hers. He remembered the way she had spoken in her final moment at the hall, not with anger, but with dignity, the kind that never once pleaded for mercy. That memory troubled him because it was not a sound of guilt. It was the sound of truth spoken by someone already condemned. One afternoon, during a routine review of estate documents, a steward, an anxious man named Hollingsspore, presented a stack of accounts for his signature. Among them was a brief note written in familiar handwriting. Adrien scanned it without interest till he reached the final line. The letter served its purpose. He will see reason now. It was signed by the Dowager, addressed to a distant cousin, dated a week before the scandal. The paper slipped from his fingers. A chill moved through him, not with shock, but with clarity, the sudden kind that strips away excuse. The fictional letter had been her doing. The doubt that exiled his wife had been planted intentionally, not discovered accidentally. He rose so abruptly his chair scraped across the floor. Hollings stammered an apology, unsure what offense he had committed, unable to guess the weight of the revelation unfolding before him. Adrien's voice, though calm, bore the force of a man who would no longer accept silence. "Ready my carriage?" he said. "I ride for Somerset." He retrieved the violet from his desk and placed it safely in his breast pocket. Then he left Ashborne Hall without ceremony or farewell. The journey southward felt longer than any he had taken before. Rain swept across the fields. Memories echoed through the carriage, her voice beneath the oak. Her laughter when he first misquoted poetry, her quiet courage when faced with accusation. He ached, but not for comfort. He ached for the chance to earn forgiveness that might never be given. The village of Somerset greeted him with modest charm. He asked discreetly for Mrs. Evans. The innkeeper pointed to a hill beyond the churchyard. "A widow," he said. "Keeps to herself. Works hard. Kind soul." Adrien thanked him, though guilt seemed to grow heavier with every step he took toward the cottage. He paused at the door, listening. Within, a soft lullaby was being sung, hesitant at first, but warm. He recognized the melody. It was the same she had hummed when alone in the garden at Ashborne. When Avena appeared at the threshold, candlelight caught the weariness in her eyes, and the strength still alive beneath it. She did not move closer. She simply studied him, as though he were a memory returned in physical form. "You should not be here," she said. Her voice held neither anger nor affection, only guarded caution. "The world believes me gone. I prefer it that way." Adrien removed his gloves slowly, as though discarding armor. "I was deceived," he answered. "The letter was forged. My mother's doing." She did not react outwardly, but her breath thinned. "I wronged you," he continued. "Beyond measure? I cannot undo what is past, but I am here to face it." She turned her face away for a moment, perhaps to steady herself, perhaps to keep tears from forming. "A year of exile cannot be erased by apology," she said. "Go back to your world. Ours are no longer the same." He stepped inside. The warmth of the hearth touched his coat. Then he saw the child in the cradle. His voice faltered. "Is that?" She nodded once. "Your son." Silence came with reverence. He knelt beside the cradle, his hand trembling as he reached toward the small boy. When Thomas grasped his thumb, something deep within Adrien brokened, then began to rebuild itself. He looked up at Avena, tears untouched, but present. "I should have believed you," he said. "I should have been here." Her answer was quiet but unwavering. "Belief is not a gift. It is a duty." And though her words were stern, her eyes held something no letter could forge, truth waiting to be heard. The fire crackled, the child slept, and the night held a fragile peace, as if waiting to see whether it might endure. Dawn in Somerset began with a silver chill across the fields, the kind of cold light that tested endurance. Avena awoke to the soft creak of the cottage door. Adrien stood at the hearth feeding the fire, his coat still damp from the night. He had not slept, though his posture carried the steadiness of someone who had resolved something irrevocable. She remained still, watching him with cautious wonder. There had been many nights when she pictured his return, but never with such quiet conviction. When he turned, their eyes met, and she knew his presence was not a gesture, it was a promise. He spoke with a deliberate calm. "I have written to London," he said. "I will not return to Ashborne unless you and our son return with me." His words hovered in the air like a fragile truth. Yavena's hand rested automatically on the cradle. "Your mother will not allow it," she replied. "Society will not forget what it has already chosen to believe." Adrien crossed the small room, his boots brushing against the uneven floor. "Then let them remember something new," he said. "Let them remember that truth endured, and so did we." She studied him carefully. There was no pride in his tone, no desperation, only clarity. That frightened her more than anger ever could. For a year, survival had meant stillness, quiet, and restraint. Now, his return threatened to awaken something she had suppressed. Hope. They spent that day mapping an uneasy peace. Yvena prepared tea, while Adrien mended a loose shutter outside, fumbling with tools as though manual labor were unfamiliar yet oddly welcome. Several times he paused to look in through the window. Each time his eyes found the cradle, as if confirming reality, ensuring she had not vanished again into rumor. When he returned indoors, the kettle was steaming. Yvena handed him a cup. The simple gesture felt monumental. He held it with care, as though it might shatter beneath too much force. "Tell me about our son," he said. She hesitated, then spoke softly of sleepless nights, fevers weathered alone, small triumphs. His first smile. His first word, which was nearly a cough, but still felt like speech. Adrien listened with his head bowed, his hands clasped. She watched guilt settle into humility, reshaping the man she had once loved. "I named him Thomas," she continued, "for my father. I feared that giving him your name would invite misfortune." Adrien's eyes turned to the cradle, his expression unreadable, but reverent. "Thomas Cavendish," he murmured. "If you permit it, he will carry both names. Both heritages." His words were simple, but in them lay a vow. They spent the evening in quiet conversation, careful not to tread too deeply into memory. The lamplight flickered across the table, drawing gentle shadows across their faces. Now and then, they exchanged glances that lingered without intent, like old melodies remembered by instinct alone. When Thomas had been settled, Yvena began clearing the dishes. Adrien watched her move, noting the differences hardship had etched into her laner cheeks. Steady eyes, movements shaped by necessity rather than grace. "I have thought often," he said, "of the day we met beneath the oak. You corrected my poetry, though you pretended to be sketching." She allowed a faint smile. "You mistook silence for indifference," he returned it gently. "And you mistook awkwardness for confidence." There was warmth in the air then, brief but real. Outside, wind swept through the valley, rattling the shutters. The moment of comfort faded under the weight of returning conflict. She set a cup down and faced him squarely. "You intend to confront your mother?" His silence confirmed it. "Adrien," she continued, "she will not view Thomas as an heir but as evidence of betrayal." He nodded slowly. "Then let her bear the burden of her own cruelty. I will not let it pass to our son." Though his voice was steady, she sensed the fear beneath it. Choices made in passion could shake empires, and Ashborne was its own empire. She retired to her room then, but sleep eluded her. Memories rose like ghosts the night she left, the road swallowed by rain, the ache that had followed her for a year. Yet somewhere among the pain was a fragile thread of trust, thin, hesitant, but unbroken. She rose quietly and returned to the hearth. Adrien remained there, awake, his hands clasped as though held in prayer. She approached him softly. "You should rest," she said. He looked up, startled. "I cannot," he answered. "I spent too long resting in ignorance." She studied him with a new awareness. Something had changed, not entirely, but enough. He still bore pride, but it no longer served ego. It now guarded conscience. "And if I cannot forgive you?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "Then I will remain here until you ask me to leave. What I once failed to earn, I will not demand." She reached for the prayer book on the mantel. Between its pages lay a dried violet, brittle but intact. She placed it on the table between them. I kept it, she said, not because I forgave you, but because I could not bear to forget. He touched the flower lightly, expression unreadable. You kept hope alive when I could not, he said. Perhaps that is forgiveness in another form. The violet remained between them, a relic of memory and possibility. Yvain arose, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder as she passed. You may stay tonight, she said. Tomorrow, we will speak again. It was neither surrender nor acceptance, but something re-ran invitation to earn trust. He inclined his head, gratitude softened by restraint. Good night, Yvain. She paused before reaching her room. Good night, she replied. Yet both remained awake long after the candle burned low, aware that dawn would bring more than light. It would demand courage. It would measure the truth of everything spoken in the quiet hours between dusk and morning. When sunrise finally reached the cottage window, it found two souls who were no longer bound by accusation, but not yet free from consequence. Something new had been set into motion, and neither could stop it now. The morning they departed, Somerset was clear and cold, the fields rimmed with frost like silver lace. The carriage waited quietly at the edge of the cottage garden. Yvain gathered Thomas in her arms while Adrien secured their belongings with care, as though the simplest actions might steady his resolve. Each breath they took in the chilled air felt like a step across a threshold neither could return from. The villagers watched from a respectful distance, offering unspoken farewells to the quiet widow whose truth they had never known. Adrien opened the carriage door and extended his hand. She hesitated for a moment, not from doubt, but from reverence. The life she had built in this place was fragile, but real. Yet when Thomas reached toward his father with a small, trusting sound, hesitation fell away. They took their seats, and the wheels turned over the frozen road. Carrying them toward the home that had once cast her out, England unfolded around them in hushed colors. Bare trees like dark veins against the pale sky, distant church bells echoing through the air as though marking the beginning of a reckoning. Adrien sat upright, his expression composed, but his hands fidgeted within his gloves. Yvain watched him and wondered whether he feared judgment or sought it. Without speaking, she sensed he would accept whichever came first. Thomas rested between them, his small breaths forming clouds on the cold carriage window. Each exhale felt like a reminder that the journey was not for vengeance, but for the future of a child who deserved to live without shadows. As Ashborne Hall came into view, its iron gates gleaming with morning light, Yvain felt her heart tighten. A year ago, she had passed beneath them with humiliation pressed into her bones. Now she returned with her son in her arms, in a quiet, unwavering dignity that neither title nor exile could destroy. The guards recognized the crest on the carriage and swiftly opened the gates. Adrien's posture changed subtly. That old training returned, but it no longer commanded him. It steadied him. The path to the hall was long and lined with winter roses, pale but still standing. Yvain saw them as she held Thomas close, fragile yet surviving. They reminded her of the violet pressed between the pages of her prayer book. The entrance doors stood wide, the marble floor gleaming in the morning light. Portraits of past Cavendishes peered from the walls as though assessing their lineage's newest test. At the head of the staircase stood the Dowager Duchess, poised like a monarch, awaiting tribute. She did not move as they entered, but her eyes flickered when they saw the child. Adrien stepped forward with calm precision. "Mother," he said, "I bring my wife and my son." The dowager's face remained composed, though her gaze lingered on the infant's blue eyes, so unmistakably her bloodline. The tension in the hall settled like waiting thunder. "You defy propriety," she said quietly. "You imagine scandal will vanish because you wish it so." Yvain met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Truth does not vanish," she replied. "Only those who fear it do." Adrien turned to the servants gathered along the edges of the hall. His voice carried the clarity of a final decision. "Lady Yvain Cavendish returns as Duchess of Ashborne. Any who question it may find other employment by morning." A ripple moved through the room, not applause, not protest, but silent acknowledgement. The dowager's gaze hardened, yet she understood the tone of his command. Yvain watched her carefully. For the first time, doubt flickered in the older woman's eyes. Whether it was guilt or defeat, Ivana could not yet tell. She took a step forward, cradling Thomas. The dowager hesitated, then addressed her grandson for the first time. "So," she said, voice brittle, "the heir has returned." The child stared back with innocent wonder. The dowager looked away first. News spread swiftly across the estate. Some servants bowed respectfully. Others merely watched, curious to see whether scandal would reignite or dissolve into truth. Adrien requested a formal dinner that evening. Ivana dressed simply, refusing jewels or embellishment. "I will not gild my name," she said. "Truth must walk without disguise." When they entered the dining hall together, conversation ceased. Every face turned toward them, some skeptical, others softened by curiosity. Adrien rose at the head of the table. "You all remember the night my wife was sent from this hall," he said. "You remember the accusations? They were false." He paused only to steady his breath. "The letter that condemned her was forged by my mother's hand." A hush followed, deep and heavy. Ivana stood without trembling. Her voice emerged clear. "I seek no retribution. Only the right to live without falsehood. My past may be debated. My sons will not." The dowager lowered her eyes, neither admitting nor denying guilt. Yet silence, in that moment, was as much confession as words. Slowly, the guests began to stand some in support, some in caution, but none in defiance. The tide had turned. When the last candle dimmed and the guests departed, Adrien found Ivana standing in the garden behind the hall. The air smelled faintly of early blossoms, though winter had not yet yielded. He approached quietly. "Do you regret returning?" She shook her head. "Only that it required so much sorrow to reach this peace." They walked along the garden path, toward the ancient oak where their courtship began. Beneath its branches, he spoke gently. "I have ordered the crest of Ashborne to be redrawn. It will carry the violet not for its beauty, but for its endurance." Her eyes filled with quiet warmth. "Fragile things survive," she whispered. "You taught me that," he replied. Above them, the wind moved through the bare branches like a slow, steady breath. In the hall behind them, Thomas slept peacefully at last beneath the roof of his birthright. They stood together as if reclaiming something long buried, not only love, but the belief that forgiveness need not erase the past, only right beyond it. Far away, church bells began to chime, marking a new hour. Their hands found each other naturally, without ceremony. In that moment, Ashborne Hall was not a fortress, nor a monument. It was only a home wounded, but still capable of shelter. And for the first time since the night she was cast out, Ivana felt something deeper than survival. She felt the quiet strength of a life no longer lived in shadows. The night carried their child's soft laughter through the open window. The future, though uncertain, no longer felt like exile. It felt like return.